Let's talk a little bit about next week's parsha for a moment. Next week, great week for the Shabbos, the parsha Shlach. Parsha Shlach, we know, is a transitional parsha. There is a breakdown which occurs, which has consequences for the entire course of Jewish history, but especially so for that generation. When the Jews were destined to enter Eretz Yisrael themselves. But they sent the spies came back with their bad report, the people were disillusioned. They complained, and we know how the story unfolds. As a consequence, it was decreed that the Jewish people would remain in the desert, die there, only their children would be allowed to go on to Eretz Yisrael. So this is the central message of next week's parsha. Now, one thing is not clear from the parsha, but is clarified by Moshe Rabbeinu in his retelling of the story in Sefer Dvarim. Within our parsha, it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to Moshe Rabbeinu and says, "Shlach l'cha nashim," send spies. But that's not exactly how it happened. In Sefer Dvarim, it says that the impetus to send Meraglim came from the Jewish people. The Jewish people said, listen, we're going to conquer the land, and we need intelligence. We need to know the fortifications, where the soldiers, the defenders are deployed. So it was the people's idea. And they came to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu thought it was a good idea. So if that's really how it happened, it was the people's idea, and Moshe relented. What's HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling him? So Rashi explains over here that when Hashem said "Shlach l'cha anashim," it really wasn't a command as much as a warning. Hashem was saying, "Shlach l'cha anashim." If you want to send spies, send. I don't recommend it. You can send spies. So the obvious question is that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself told Moshe Rabbeinu, I don't recommend it, why did Moshe Rabbeinu do it? It was apparently Moshe Rabbeinu felt he had no choice. And as much as the people demanded the spies, he couldn't say no. And really the Ramban speaks this out, that if Moshe Rabbeinu would have said no, the people would have jumped to the conclusion that Moshe is hiding something. There's something about Eretz Yisrael, he doesn't want to know. So Moshe Rabbeinu found himself, so to speak, on the horns of a dilemma. The people want spies. If he agrees, he knew that there could be negative consequences. If he protests, there might also be negative consequences, so he relents. So when Moshe Rabbeinu consents to the sending of the spies, we should assume that it probably was with reluctance. But he really had no choice. He had to. And it's not in our parsha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Moshe to doing it. He's warning him, you should know, if you feel you have to, then I'm letting you. But you should know that it's not a good idea. You know, this episode seems to typify a breakdown in leadership. Leadership is not being led by the people. When the people make a demand, and now you make a calculation. Should I give in? Should I not give in? It's really not a good idea, but if I don't give in, I'm going to lose the people, maybe the consequences will be worse. That already is a failure of leadership. Because leadership has to lead, not follow. There's a famous Vertel that's said by Rabbi Salanter. It says in the Gemara that the Ikvus of the Mashiach, the era before Mashiach's coming, Pnei Hador Pnei HaKelef, the face of the generation would be like the face of a dog. Pnei Hador Pnei HaKelef. So what does this mean, the face of the generation? So Rabbi Salanter said it means that the leaders of the generation, the face of the generation is the leadership of the generation. They'll be like dogs. Watch this, will be like dogs. This is a very famous thing. You know, when a man takes his dog for a walk, you often find the dog walking in front of the master. To the extent that if you really didn't understand what was going on, you'd think the dog was taking the master for a walk. The dog was leading the master. But in reality, it isn't that way. Really, the master is leading the dog. The dog is walking ahead. But every so often, the dog turns around to pick up its cues from the master. Is the master going straight? Is he turning right? Is he turning left? So there's a impression, if you will, that the dog is leading, but in fact the dog is being led. So Yisrael said that in the Ikvastir of Mashiach, that'll be the nature of leadership. Our leaders will only in the most superficial sense actually be leading. But in reality, they'll be led. They'll be led by the people they're meant to lead. The people will decide, and the leaders will make a show as if they are leading. In reality, they're being led themselves. And the truth is, poll-driven leadership is exactly that. You know, if a politician consults the polls to see which way the wind is blowing today, and that basis makes his decision, then in fact, is he really leading? No. Now again, in a democracy, that might not be a problem. You know, there certainly is a theory in democratic leadership, democratic government, that the people are really, the officials, the representatives, are meant to be conduits for the expression of the will of the electorate. So maybe it is consistent with political theory that in a democracy at least, leaders should be guided by polls, but not leadership in the Torah. Torah leadership doesn't rely on the will of the people. Torah leadership relies on the will of the Ribono Shel Olam. So for a leader to relent and give in to something which HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself said is not a good idea, out of fear of losing the people, that really is a breakdown of leadership. You have to wonder, why did that come about? The answer really is this week's parsha. The parsha's Beha'alotcha really is a record of the collapse of the leadership of Moshe Rabbeinu. Not to Moshe's fault, but the inability of the people to share in Moshe Rabbeinu's vision. And we're going to see this in many, many ways. But I want to illustrate, bring this out, by making an observation about what may be a basic difference between Moshe on the one hand and Aaron. Aaron was the second in command. He was, after Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest Jewish leader. Yet in a very significant way, doesn't really come close to the Madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's introduce this with an idea that Mesilas Yesharim says. We talk about doing mitzvah, serving Hashem. And we know the ideal is to serve Hashem lishma, and to avoid serving Hashem shelo lishma, not lishma. So what does lishma mean? Lishma means for its own sake. For its own sake. A person should do mitzvahs for their own sake, not with an ulterior motive, not with a hidden agenda, not for honor, not for money, not for glory. A person should serve Hashem for its own sake. What if a person would serve Hashem in order to achieve dveikus, to achieve closeness to God, to achieve the bliss of the world to come? Would that be considered lishma or shelo lishma? Now, to serve God for the rewards of this world, I think we can agree that that's shelo lishma. What are the rewards of the next? You know, the bliss of the righteous, and paradise, basking in the radiance of the Shekhinah, achieving a state of bonding, dveikus with the divine. If a person will serve God to achieve that, is that a faulty kavanah? Would we say that that's called shelo lishma, not doing it for its own sake? It's a tough issue. The Mesilas Yesharim seems to say that intention, the intention to achieve dveikus, to bond with the Shekhinah, would be considered the Shema. Would be considered a proper intention. And I think that the explanation of why it is considered a proper intention and not an ulterior motive is really rooted in something that the Ramchal himself writes in another one of his Sfarim, the Sefer Derech Hashem. This is an amazing thing. He says like this. He says, when we do a mitzvah, we know we're doing God's will. But says the Ramchal, we are doing God's will in two different ways. Every time we do a mitzvah, we are fulfilling God's will in two different ways. The obvious way is obedience. God said do this, and we do that, so we're doing God's will. God says put on tefillin, wear tzitzis, keep tzedakah, keep Shabbos, and we do those mitzvahs, so obviously we are complying with the divine will, so we are doing what He wants. But in another sense we're doing it. Notice what he writes. Why does Hashem give us these mitzvahs? What is the purpose of the mitzvahs? The purpose of the mitzvahs, the reason for the mitzvahs, is that through the performance of the mitzvahs, we should achieve dveikus with God. We should bond to God. The world, the structure of the soul is such that these acts have the power to create a bond with God. That's the nature of a mitzvah itself. And God gave us the mitzvahs for no other reason, not because God has any thrill out of our devotion. He gave the mitzvahs for us, for our benefit, that we should be able to achieve this state of dveikus and bask in the radiance of the divine presence in the world to come. So when we do a mitzvah and we achieve that state of dveikus, in that sense we're also doing the divine will. Because we are achieving that which God wants us to achieve through the performance of a mitzvah. I'll give you an example. Let's say a mother prepares food for her son. Why? She wants him to be well nourished. So she prepares a nourishing meal. Now she tells the son, eat. And the son is obedient, the son eats. So really the son is fulfilling the will of the mother in two ways. On the superficial level, the mother said eat, he eats, he's doing what he's told, so he's doing his mother's will. But in a more deep sense, since the mother wants him to be nourished, and he is nourished through the process of eating, in that way he's doing his mother's will. He's accomplishing what his mother wants to accomplish by his eating. The mother made the meal to nourish the child is nourished by eating it, and therefore, in that sense also, the child is doing his mother's will. So apply that to God. In the simple sense, whenever we do a mitzvah, we're doing God's will. God said, do the mitzvah, we're doing the mitzvah. But in a deeper sense, the reason God told us to do the mitzvah is that we should achieve dveikus. We do achieve dveikus through the doing of the mitzvah, so in that sense we're also doing what God wants. And therefore the Ramchal says that is a perfectly legitimate kavanah. If you do a mitzvah for the reason that God gave the mitzvah, you can't find fault with that. You can't say that that's a deficiency in the kavanah. You're doing the mitzvah for the very reason that God gave the mitzvah. There's nothing wrong with that. So if I would do a mitzvah to make money or to get honor or acclaim or to get my picture in the newspaper or something like that, so I'm doing the mitzvah for a different reason, that's called shaloi lishma. I'm not doing the mitzvah for a legitimate reason. But if God gave the mitzvah in order that I should achieve dveikus, and I achieved dveikus, so since I'm doing it for the reason that God gave the mitzvah, that's a perfectly legitimate intention.
So what if you also enjoy doing the mitzvah? Like people who may enjoy a certain lifestyle, and enjoy being part of a certain community, and enjoy the lifestyle of that community.
That's shaloi lishma.
That's shaloi lishma.
Sure. In other words, let's put it this way. Let's say you want to be part of a certain social group. And this is what everyone else is into.
But if you enjoy doing the mitzvah in particular, whatever, if it goes Torah dancing, go around the Torah, you enjoy it. What if you enjoy it? Is that okay to enjoy it?
It depends why you enjoy it. Right? But if you enjoy it because you enjoy physical exercise and most often your activities are sedentary, but Simchas Torah you get to exert yourself. That's probably a shloim l'shma. So you're not doing it for the reason that God gave them it. Right? God didn't give us the Yom Tov of Shemini Atzeres Simchas Torah because we lack physical exercise. Right? Each opportunity to honor the Torah. If it happens to be that there's a physical exertion and it's good for you as well, that's a side issue. Doing it for that side purpose would be shlo lishma. But doing it for the very reason that God commanded the mitzvah, that's lishma. But the Mesilas Yesharim says, interestingly, that it's a perfectly legitimate kavanah, but it's not the loftiest kavanah. And therefore a person who is not merely a tzaddik, but a person who is on the level of a chassid, an unusually pious person, transcends that kavanah. He doesn't do the mitzvah even for the sake of the bliss of the world to come. Again, a person who would do that is considered a tzaddik. And it's really a Gemara. The Gemara says in Pesachim that if a person gives money to tzedakah, and he says, I'm giving it in order that I should merit a share in the world to come, he's a tzaddik. He's a tzaddik. He's absolutely righteous, but he wouldn't call him a chassid. What is the kavanah of the chassid? The kavanah of the chassid, says the Mesilas Yesharim, is that I'm doing the mitzvah solely for the honor of God, to give honor to God. And therefore it's interesting that to the chassid, the relationship of God as he who commands the mitzvah and the chassid as he who performs the mitzvah is this unusual relationship of two people each trying to give honor to the other person. You know, like two people come to a doorway and one says that after you. Says, no, after you. After you. After you. Each trying to give honor to the other person. That's the reality. Whereas God gives the mitzvah because he wants to give us a means by which we can earn our eternal bliss in the world to come. And the chassid turns the tables and says, chas v'shalom, I'm not doing it for that. I'm not interested in that at all. It's not my concern whether I'll have bliss in the world to come. I'm doing it only to give you honor. And so again, doing it for the bliss of the world to come is legitimate. A person who does it without intention, there's no deficiency in his act, he's certainly called a 100% tzaddik. But the chassid is the higher level. Now what's the difference? What's the practical difference? The practical difference is like this. Let's say a person has a mitzvah, and due to circumstances beyond his control, he's unable to do the mitzvah. Something happens. The lulav is not delivered. He tried his best, but due to circumstances beyond his control, he can't do the mitzvah. Is there a sense of disappointment? Sure. So let's think about it for a second. God runs the world. So if God brought about the circumstances that I shouldn't be able to do this mitzvah, so obviously he doesn't want me to do the mitzvah. Yeah. So if I'm thinking in terms of God's honor, there's no room for disappointment. I do mitzvahs when God wants me to do mitzvahs. When God doesn't want me to do mitzvahs, I don't do mitzvahs. That's the will of God. How can I be disappointed? I'm only doing mitzvahs because it's the will of God. In this instance, it's the will of God. I not do the mitzvahs, I'm disappointed. How can I be disappointed? Disappointment is only possible when I'm thinking in terms of myself. So even if it's the most lofty personal intention, I'm doing it in order to achieve the bliss of Olam Haba for myself, which is a legitimate intention. But if I have something personal in mind, then there can be disappointment. You see the difference? It's a very subtle difference. But I believe in Hasgach. I believe God runs the world. So if circumstances come up that prevent me from being able to do this mitzvah, I have to assume that that's God's will. So therefore, a person who does the mitzvah totally to fulfill God's will can't be disappointed. Because he says, I want to do the mitzvah because I believe that was God's will, but apparently I see it's not God's will. If it was God's will, he would have brought about conditions that would have allowed me to do the mitzvah. He didn't. So therefore, God doesn't want me to do it. I'm going to upset about it. Now, there was a Maisa, a story like this, that the Briskerov, exerted a superhuman effort to obtain an esrog. It was Shemitah, and the Briskerov held that the esrogim that were picked in Eretz Yisrael during Shemitah were not valid, a whole discussion. And he wanted an esrog from outside of Eretz Yisrael, and it was a whole hassle getting it and importing it, and getting it inspected through the airport. And he exerted a superhuman effort to get a hold of this esrog. And in the end, it didn't work out. And the person that he had asked to arrange everything had to report to him that there's no esrog. So the Rabbi said, thank you very much. Yashikayach. That's it. No disappointment. You're not upset. You worked so hard. I worked so hard because I believe that that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted me to do. Apparently, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want me to have an esrog. That's God's will. I have to accept that. That's the level of chassid, where you're doing it solely for God's honor. So, believing that God runs the world, now you see God doesn't want it. So God doesn't want it. God doesn't want it. What can you do? But when you think of something personal, then that's what Echalisha Sadas. You feel bad because you're deprived of something you wanted for yourself. Now let's think for a moment. Parshas Beha'alotcha, the beginning of the parsha, first Rashi in the parsha, famous Rashi, opens with the mitzvah lighting the menorah. And this really doesn't belong here because the mitzvah lighting the menorah we already had back in Parshas Psad, we had it back in Parshas Emor. And what they're doing here, third time, in Parshas Beha'alotcha. So Rashi quotes a very interesting medrash that when, really this is connected to the end of last week's parsha. In the last week's parsha we had the Nesiim, the princes of the tribes, brought sacrifices for the dedication of the Mishkan. So the Nasi, the prince of Shevet Ruvain, brought a sacrifice, and the prince of Shevet Shimon brought a sacrifice, and the prince of Shevet Levi, no prince of Shevet Levi, no sacrifice. So it says that Aaron was very upset that his tribe had no portion in the dedication of the Mishkan. He had a Chalisha Sadas, he felt bad. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu consoled him and said, don't worry, your lot is greater than theirs, you like the menorah. Now, again, we're not going to go into why this is a consolation, what a special lighting the menorah, and why it was just with that God consoled him. There's a long Ramban that talks about this. But God was coming to console Aaron, and therefore he gives him this command to light the menorah. Now there's a question that we have to ask, and strangely I didn't see anyone ask this question. If I would ask you, who is the Nasi, who is the prince of Shevet Levi? If Shevet Levi had a prince, it'd be Moshe, not Aaron. Right? Moshe is higher than Aaron. Right?
Was there a thing that somehow with Korach, or somebody else was appointed
that was like this. That was the Nasi of the families. The three families, Gersh, Kassamari, each had a Nasi. There was no overall Nasi for Shevet Levi. Right?
Question 2. This one, Rabbi Eli.
Pardon?
Rabbi Eli Golasser. That's your camera.
It's my camera.
For kosher too.
Oh, for
Okay.
kosher too.
Yeah.
It's your camera.
Give it to David.
Okay. So again, so the family of Gershon had a Nasi, the family of Koch, the family of Merari. But there was no overall Nasi for Shevet Levi. But if there would have been an overall Nasi for Shevet Levi, who would it have been? L'chorah would have been Moshe Rabbeinu. So why is Aaron upset? Moshe should be upset. I mean, this points to the difference between Aaron and Moshe. Because for Aaron, on some level, there was still something personal in doing a mitzvah. And therefore there could be a chalisha sadas, there could be a sense of disappointment. Moshe Rabbeinu was so selfless that there's nothing that Moshe does for himself. Because everything is done for the honor of Yom Shlomo. So therefore, whatever the Rebbe says, if the Rebbe says, bring a carbon, bring a carbon. Says, don't bring a carbon, don't bring a carbon. There's no potential for disappointment. And that difference, it's a very subtle difference. But if you are disappointed, that means there's something personal, something you feel. This is something that I need for my own spirituality, my own development, my own madrega. And when you think in those terms, then it could be a very lofty intention, but it's not the highest intention. It's not the loftiest intention. And therefore, it's only Aaron who could be upset. Moshe Rabbeinu really would have had more right to be upset, because again, as we said, if there was a Nasi of Shevet Levi, it would have been Moshe, not Aaron. But Moshe isn't upset. He doesn't need to be consoled. Because Moshe is, as we also learned from this week's parsha, is so selfless. He's the most humble of all men. He's the most selfless. So the possibility of disappointment is inconceivable. Is inconceivable. Now, if you fast forward to the end of the parsha, as we see that the parsha ends with an episode in which Aaron and Miriam speak against Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu did something which then was inexplicable. Moshe Rabbeinu separated himself from his wife. Somehow they found out about it, and they felt this was unjustified. And they say, essentially, who does he think he is? If God only speaks to him, God speaks to us as well. And nevertheless, we are able to have a family life. We're both married. We live with our spouses. Because why does Moshe Rabbeinu think he's any different? And the Rebbe Shlomo very, very harshly rebukes them. And he says, how dare you speak against Moshe Rabbeinu? You're comparing yourself to Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Rebbe goes into a long, long discussion as to the differences between the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Nevuah of other Nevi'im, how Moshe Rabbeinu's level of Nevuah is so much higher. And we know, the Rambam explains in the Shemona Prakim, that the different levels among the Nevi'im, the reason why this Navi's Nevuah is on a lower level and this Navi's Nevuah is on a higher level, is all a function of their character perfection. Because what are the barriers to complete Nevuah? Are the personality flaws, the character flaws. This person is an angry person, this person is a boastful person, this person is a miserly person. So these types of flaws preclude the possibility of perfect Nevuah. It's like a cloudy lens between the Navi and the object of his Nevuah. Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah was Baspaklaria HaMe'ira. It was through a clear lens. There was no cloudiness at all. So why is that? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was on the highest level of personality perfection imaginable. And therefore that's what God said. Forget the question of whether Moshe was justified or not. But how do you have the audacity to speak against him? You don't understand that Moshe Rabbeinu is light years ahead of you. But they do. You see, they do equate themselves to Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, the inability to see that Moshe Rabbeinu is loftier is a very serious issue, and that's why I think these two stories in the parsha really are the frame for the parsha. The first story of the Chalisha Sadas of Aaron, the disappointment of Aaron, that points to the fact that there is a real difference between Aaron and Moshe. Moshe has no Chalisha Sadas. Aaron has a Chalisha Sadas. Aaron has a sense of disappointment. And the end of the parsha is related to that, because at the end of the parsha, it's the inability of them to see that Moshe Rabbeinu is superior. Whereas they critique Moshe Rabbeinu as if he's an equal. And that's the rebuke that the Rabbi says, how dare you speak against Moshe Rabbeinu? How do you look at Moshe Rabbeinu as your equal? You don't see that Moshe Rabbeinu is so much loftier than you are. And I don't want to go into detail, but in past days we talked about this, that it's interesting that God doesn't justify Moshe Rabbeinu and Miriam. Miriam and Aaron, they have a grievance. They believe Moshe did an injustice, separated himself from his wife. So God doesn't come to explain. Oh, you have a question? I'll tell you why. This is why he did it. And there are answers. That's not what God was going to do. God was going to say that your critique is illegitimate. Whereas you're critical of Moshe Rabbeinu because you're treating Moshe Rabbeinu like yourself. But Moshe Rabbeinu is not any better than I am, and therefore whatever I do, he should also do. So that's a mistake. The failure to recognize the superiority of Moshe Rabbeinu is a grievous error. It's a terrible error. It's an error, by the way, we all are guilty of. As we question the great Gedolei Yisrael because we imagine them to be people, plain folks, just like us. So we question their judgment. But in reality, if we had an adequate appreciation of who they are and what they are, we wouldn't dare criticize. Because who are we to render a judgment? Who are we to have an opinion on a matter which they've ruled? We can't even approach them in piety and scholarship. We're going to argue with them. We're going to, well, we think you're wrong. Do it my way. Now, if these are the frames of the parsha, probably there's something in the middle that also relates to this theme. And it's a very, very interesting story in the middle of the parsha. And it says the Jewish people came with a complaint. They said, we want meat. We want meat. We're tired of mun all day, mun on Sunday, mun on Monday, mun on Tuesday. Now, mun was a very, very perfect food. But nevertheless, every day they felt it was too much. We want meat. So Moshe Rabbeinu comes to God and says, how am I going to give them meat? How am I going to give them meat? So Breitowitz says, okay, I'll tell you what. Appoint for yourself 70 judges who will assist you in leadership of the people. And as far as the problem of meat, I'm going to send a flock of slav, a flock of quails, and people will catch the quails, and they'll be able to eat meat, not for a day, not for 5 days, not for 10 days, for 30 days, until it will come out of their noses, and they'll realize that they made a big mistake in protesting. That's what the Torah says. So there's an obvious question which Ramban asks, which is that, wait a minute, so what's the purpose of the 70 judges? Moshe Rabbeinu comes to God and says, how am I going to provide them meat? So what's Moshe's problem? Providing meat. Are the 70 judges going to assist in providing meat? The meat's going to come miraculously. So what's the purpose of the 70 judges? Here's the problem. The Ramban asks this question. The Ramban gives an answer which is hard to understand. The Ramban says that God sensed that Moshe Rabbeinu was frustrated not only because of the meat. Sometimes, I guess, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. But Moshe Rabbeinu was frustrated anyway, that the burden of leading the Jewish people was too heavy. So Kodesh Baruch Hu, understanding that, said, listen, forget the meat for a moment. I see that in any case, you see it's too heavy a burden. I'll give you 70 assistants. That'll solve the general problem. Now, the specific problem of meat is not going to be addressed by that, because even 70 judges can't bring meat for the people. So the meat is going to come miraculously. But the 70 judges aren't for the sake of the meat. The 70 judges are to assist you with generally in leadership, because I perceive that that's really what's bothering you. It's an amazing thing. It's an insight into human nature. Some other person complains about something, and you think that if you address that problem, you'll solve the underlying issue. It's not really that. The underlying issue may be something else. I once read that with husbands and wives, this is sometimes an issue, that a wife will come to her husband with a problem, and the husband will, well, that's no problem, you can solve it this way. And he's missing the point. What the wife really wants is not a solution to the problems. She wants him to demonstrate some empathy, some caring, that what bothers her bothers him too. So when he comes up with this very fast solution to the problem, well, that's easy, just do it like this. So he's missing the entire point. Because the Baruch Hu is a much more perceptive listener. So when Moshe Rabbeinu complains, how am I going to give them meat? I'm going to Baruch Hu understand just meat is not the issue. It's not only, this is just the final blow. It's something which has been escalating over time. So therefore, first we have to give you assistance, but after that, we'll deal with the meat, and the meat will come miraculously. It's their own boundaries. But there's an amazing interpretation, which the Shemeach and Ashachachma says, Hasema says, the same explanation, very beautiful explanation, it's like this, that the 70 judges had a role to play in the providing of the meat too. Now the Gemara says, in the Seches Tainus, that there were 3 great gifts that the Jewish people enjoyed in the desert. The mon, which they ate, the mayim, the water of the well of Miriam, the water from which they drank, and the clouds of glory, the Inani covered, which protected them. The Gemara says that the mon was in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. The water was in the merit of Miriam. And the Inani covered were in the merit of Aaron. That's what the Gemara says. Now what does that mean? That we receive something in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. What does that mean? In the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Meshech Chachma says an amazing thing. We think that when something comes in the merit of a tzaddik, or comes to the tzaddik in his own merit, we think it means like this, that the tzaddik has done many good deeds, he's deserving, so God rewards him and gives him this thing. It's really much deeper than that. You see, in life, the tzaddik yearns for opportunities to behold God's glory. He's looking for experiences which will impress upon him God's majesty and greatness. Now, most of us go through life, we're happy just to manage, pay our bills, survive, keep our noses above water. But the tzaddik wants more than that out of life. The tzaddik wants that the experiences of his life are experiences wherein he can behold God's majesty. When the tzaddik goes to a place of great natural beauty, it's not just to air out his musty soul. It's because when he sees those things, he actually sees the Yad Hashem, he sees the hand of God. And everything that comes to the tzaddik serves that purpose. Now, sometimes there are things that the average person can't appreciate. The average person can't appreciate it. Like the average person, it seems this is only a person of very fine, discerning taste appreciates it. So take mon, for example. Right, mon was the finest food possible. The Ramban says that mon is really the radiance of the Shekhinah that takes on physical substance. When I say the radiance of the Shekhinah, not the essence of God. The radiance of the Shekhinah is a created substance, a spiritual substance, but when it comes to material, that's mon. You eat that, it's soul food. The real sense. Now, with the average person who receives a plate of mon, looks at it and says, that's it? It doesn't look like anything special. It can have a good taste, but it's not a satisfying eating experience. I don't know if it had the mouthfeel of anything you wanted to taste like. Well, it had the taste, but I don't know if it had the texture. So it didn't look like anything you could have wanted. And you see, the Jews got tired of it. That's why they were complaining. They couldn't appreciate it for what it was. So for the average Jew, the fact that we were sustained 40 years with mon, he doesn't look at this as something which typifies God's greatness. If God was as great as he's supposed to be, he could have done better. He would have done better. Right? But there was one person in the world who was a very, very discerning person. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. And he was able to see that this is 1,000 times better. This is 1,000,000 times better than any material thing. Better than steak, better than cheesecake, better than... it's fun. And when Moshe Rabbeinu beheld the Jews being sustained by mon for 40 years, to Moshe Rabbeinu this was an opportunity to how wondrous are your works, O Lord. That this is how you sustain the Jewish people, not with meat, and not with whatnot. With mon, with this lofty, lofty food. And that's the idea of the mon coming in the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, if you think about it for a second, it's like wine versus Coca-Cola. And to the average person whose tastes aren't well refined, a fine wine tastes like vinegar, and Coca-Cola will beat it any day. It's sweet, that subtle mixture of cinnamon flavors. It's much better than the finest wine. But if you're Robert Parker, the famous wine critic, so he wouldn't touch Coca-Cola. So if I would drink Coca-Cola, my taste buds would be annihilated for a month. I have to save them for the fine experience of wine. He appreciates that. Now, he's not a religious Jew. I don't think he's a Jew at all. But, when he says a very priyagafen, if he did, right, his bracha very priyagafen, much greater than my very priyagafen. Because my appreciation of wine is not as great as his appreciation of wine. I mean, he had an understanding. He recognizes the subtleties of it. Otherwise, how could he rank wines? He drinks thousands of varieties of wine a year. This one is an 89, and this one is a 91. This one ranks them. Right? Okay, of course, right? But there are people that are really into this, and they can appreciate it. So if God wants to send something in the merit of a person, it's in the merit of a person who can appreciate it. So for Moshe Rabbeinu, when he sees God sending mon, to Moshe Rabbeinu that's a Kiddush Hashem. To the Bnei Yisrael, could have done better. Come to the Bnei Yisrael and we say, hey, we would like meat. Now meat, that's something which is good. Like, meat. We want meat. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, I can't bring them meat. I can only bring mon. I can't bring meat. Because from my perspective, God sustaining the Jewish people with meat is a chilul Hashem. If God could send manna and only sends meat, what for? Could be better than that. So God says, you're right. Meat cannot come in your merit. But I'm going to appoint other leaders. There'll be 70 big tzaddikim who are not quite on your madrega. And at their madrega, meat is better than one. In their schus, meat can come. Not in your schus, but in the schus of the 70, meat can come. And therefore, that's how the Arsenayach and the Sfasemis explain this beautiful parsha. That Moshe Rabbeinu says, how am I going to give them meat? In my merit, I can bring one, I can't bring meat. So the Rabbi says, appoint 70 subordinate assistants. In their merit, meat can come instead of one. So the 70 judges, not like Ramban says that it was to address other issues. The 70 address the issue of meat, because it's in their merit that the meat can come.
Was this the first time they were appointed?
This is the first time the Moshe had assistants. There were judges before, but not members of Moshe's court. There were subordinate courts. But here Moshe Rabbeinu is the head of the Supreme Court. He shares a role with the 70. That's the first time this happens. But really, when you think about the story, it's a tragic story. Because it's really the inability of Moshe Rabbeinu to lead the people. Right? The people can't be lifted up to where Moshe is at. And they have to be dealt with where they're at, which is a bit lower. And it reminds me of a story. Purim in yeshivas, yeshiva boys sometimes drink, you know that. Not a secret. So there are some yeshivas that got tired of the responsibility. So they decided in certain yeshivas that they, instead of having the boys in yeshiva for Purim, they would send them home. Let their parents worry about them. So there was a certain yeshiva, I won't mention the name of the yeshiva, where that yeshiva adopted this policy that he sent the boys home for Purim. And some of these boys live in Toronto, and they'd come home, and they'd end up in our yeshiva for Purim. So I had the occasion to run into the Nile of that yeshiva. Right? He was a very, very fine mechanech, much older than I am. And I had to ask him, I said, listen, the purpose of yeshiva is to educate boys. And part of the education of a boy is how to celebrate Purim. So it says you should keep the boys in yeshiva. Train them, educate them how to celebrate Purim. So he says, you're 100% right. He says, we have an obligation to educate them. But since they refuse to be educated, there's no point. So it's the same thing. That there's Moshe Rabbeinu really would want to lift them up to his level. But he can't lift them up to his level. So therefore, they're at their level. This is a breakdown of the authority of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's an amazing, amazing thing. That we know that as the story unfolds, it says that when they appointed these 70 judges, there was a logistical problem because there are 12 tribes and the 70 is not divisible by 12. So it turned out that 10 of the tribes would have 6 judges and 2 of the tribes only would have 5 judges. And the question was how to apportion them. So what they did was they made a lottery, and they had 72 slips of paper, and on 70 of them it said judge, and on 2 it was blank. So each shevet produced 6 candidates, and they drew the lots, and there were 2 losers who lost their jobs. But what happened was, very interestingly, that it wasn't necessary to draw the lots, because there were 2 of the candidates who were named Eldad and Nadad, were very, very humble people. And they just didn't come, didn't show up. So when they called for the 72 candidates, only 70 came. There's no problem, we have 70. But it was a very big mistake, because really Eldad and Nadad were worthy. And in the 70 there were 2 that weren't worthy. It was a very interesting thing. So what happened was that God says bestowed his spirit of prophecy on the 70, but it really wasn't on the 70 that were here. It was on 68 that were here, and the 2 that were in the camp, Elder Omeda, who didn't show up. So it was a very awkward situation that there were 2 people, the other ones, the 68 plus the 2 extras, were in the Mishkan, and they were having prophetic experiences, but these 2 guys were in the camp, right? And they were prophesying in the camp. And
what did they mean they were prophesying? What were they actually?
We'll get that in a second. And it says Yeshua came running and said, Elder made them misnabim b'machana. Elder made them prophesying in the camp. Do something, right? So Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, Halabai, everyone should be nothing to protest. So the question is, what were they prophesying? What were they prophesying? So it's about like this in the Gemara. But one Mandamra says what they were prophesying, and Rashi quotes this opinion, is that Moshe May Yeshua Machnes. Their prophecy is that Moshe Rabbeinu was going to die, and Yeshua will lead the Jews into Eretz Yisrael. Right? And Yeshua says, stop them. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, no. Let it be. Now the question is that of all the things they could have prophesied, they could have prophesied any event in the future of Klal Yisrael and world history. Just this fact that Moshe makes Yeshua Machnas, what does that have to do with this story over here? And it has everything to do with it, because that's exactly what this story is. This story is really the idea that Moshe Rabbeinu could not be the leader of the Jewish people. The Jewish people couldn't be brought up to share in his vision. So what's the natural consequence of this? But ultimately, there has to be a new leader. There'll have to be leadership which is fitting for the people, and it'll be Moshe Yeshua Machnas. Moshe will lead, Yeshua will take the Jews in.
But at this point, Moshe wasn't aware that Yeshua was going to be.
Now the amazing thing is that the events which caused Moshe to lose his right didn't happen yet. Only happens a few weeks from now in Parshas Chukas. At the end of the 40 years, which is fantastic.
Or that his sons wouldn't inherit his role.
That's something else. But that Moshe himself wouldn't go in wasn't yet determined. But it was foreseen by Eliezer and Meda. But the idea is that that's really what's going on in this week's parasha. It's Moshe Rabbeinu, the inability of Moshe Rabbeinu to raise the people to share in his vision. That's what's underlying the story. And so how do you deal with that? If you have a people that you can't bring to your level, so what do? So you're a teacher, you have a class, right? And you can't raise the students to your level. So what do you have to do? Go down to their level, right? And undoubtedly, that's what Moshe Rabbeinu did. Because Moshe Rabbeinu probably got the message that he's not going to be able to raise the people, so he's going to have to go down to their level. So what happens? That his own siblings begin to look at him as no better than us. Now it's not true. Moshe Rabbeinu himself was infinitely higher than them. But when Moshe Rabbeinu lowers himself to deal with the people, then it's certainly easy to understand why people will think he's just like us, plain folks. In other words, let's say, for example, you belong to a community where the Rav of the community is a lofty, lofty person. His mom was a tzaddik, and he wouldn't eat a crumb. He didn't eat to sustain his body. He denies himself all the pleasure of this world and so on and so forth. He says, oh, it's a tzaddik. And one day all of a sudden he changes his policy. He eats, he drinks, he plays. Goes to the ball game with his congregants. You say, okay, things have changed. Now he's just one of us, a regular guy. Right? So it's not a pella how things change. But the real consequence, of course, is, as we said in next week's parsha. In next week's parsha, with the Meraglim, right? The people come to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's how It says in Sefer Torah, the people come to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, we need to do it this way. We need to send spies. And Moshe Rabbeinu gives in. Now Moshe Rabbeinu and his Madrega certainly understood that, to the contrary, that the conquest of Eretz Yisrael is meant to be a function of faith and Emunah. It's going to be miraculous. But he can't share that vision. So therefore, he has to go down to their level. So God wants him, as Rashi says in this respect, in the beginning of Shlach, he says, listen, he says, if you want to do it, you do it. I'm telling you it's not a good idea. Well, he knew it was not a good idea. Moshe thought it was a good idea? Of course he knew it wasn't a good idea. Right? But since it's a good idea to the people he's leading, and those people can't be raised to a higher level, and that's what's going to have to be.
Where do we see evidence that Moshe did come down to their level? I mean, see the consequence that Aaron and Miriam treated it.
That's what I'm saying. It wouldn't make sense that they should speak of Moshe Rabbeinu that way. Unless that happened. Unless Moshe Rabbeinu somehow had come down to the level where that was credible. That's what I'm saying. I think that's why that story follows the story, because that's really what's happening. Moshe Rabbeinu is serving the people. But when you serve the people, then the confusion sets in.
So you're saying this is the beginning of a slippery slope?
What? It's the beginning of a slippery slope.
It continues on to the...
That was really the point I made in the beginning, which is that really the transition, in a way, is next week's parsha, Shlach. But in a real sense, the breakdown that leads to Shlach is Parshas Beha'alotcha. But this is really where the leadership of Moshe Rabbeinu comes into question. And it's a very interesting thing that the greatest leaders, in a sense, can't lead forever. Winston Churchill was voted out of office. The greatest prime minister that England had in modern history, right, led the country valiantly in war, right? But the time came that we were tired. We need a change. This is not where we want to go. Where he's going to take us. And even Moshe Rabbeinu took us out of Mitzrayim, received the Torah. There's no greater leader than Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? We, looking back in retrospect, will say, who would want to reject the vision of Moshe Rabbeinu? You have to be out of your mind. But that's what the people are doing. When God tells Moshe to appoint the 70 judges, right? Moshe says, did I give birth to this nation that you told me I should carry them as a nurse carries a child? And God says, okay, you're right. Here's 70 assistants. At that point, why didn't God tell Moshe Rabbeinu, listen, this is your job, this is your calling. Do it. Right?
He actually said it to them at the Luchos. Right? He said the ones you took out of Egypt.
Yeah.
Right?
That we have to explore. At what point is it that even God sees this impossible? But that must be the difference. That in the earlier episode, God saw that Moshe could do it. Maybe Moshe didn't see how he could do it, but he could do it. Here, he really reached a point that he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. So these parshias are parshias that we have to learn a very, very important lesson from. Because we can't have the benefit of the wise counsel of the Gedolei Yisrael, right, unless we're willing to follow them. In other words, if we take the position that their vision, their standards are beyond us, we want to be good Jews, but not quite that good, right? Then we lose the benefit of their wise counsel and leadership. They can't lead us unless we're willing to be led.